Dave coming along, and thank you for Firebolt for paying for the bar tab. That's very good. So I'm Mark, and I've got 15 minutes just to kick things off with just a few thoughts about the modern data stack, where we are now, and some of the kind of, I suppose, things we're seeing in the market and with customers and so on. So hopefully it's kind of fairly informal. It's meant to be just an opinion piece really, but hopefully you'll kind of find it useful. So, so I'm Mark. Anybody who doesn't know me, I am CEO of Rittman Analytics. I've been actually in this game now for about 25 years. Used to work actually back in the Oracle kind of world before, and very boring. So I worked in them products, and then we started this consultancy now, focusing on the modern data stack and startups and all kind of world that I guess you guys kind of work in. So the kind of title of this talk is Modern Data Stack, past, present, and future. So kind of taking a step back, I think this slide here, this image here, probably all you recognize it. This was the classic kind of, like, I suppose, architecture diagram that Fishtown put out a few years ago that talks about the modern data stack. And the idea was that instead of all these kind of monolithic BI tools and very complex data warehouses with ETL routines and so on, we had a very simple kind of setup. We had a tool for doing data extraction, which was Fivetran or Stitch or Segment or whatever. Then you had your cloud data warehouse for where you landed your raw data. Then there was, in that case, DBT for doing data transformation. And then you had a BI tool like, say, Looker, really. So the idea was you had this kind of simple, modular and scalable BI stack. So quick show of hands, who currently is working with the modern data stack? I mean, presumably most of you, yeah, exactly. So this was kind of the world back in about 2015, and then it's kind of moved on really. So I mean, this is one of the. In fact, I've seen another one of these diagrams that was the modern data stack landscape of modern data stack landscapes. And it was, each one of these was actually a landscape diagram within a landscape diagram. So anyway, but the point of this is that you've got a lot of products now and a lot of capabilities in this space, okay? And I suppose one of the questions is, well, why has it gone from that simple kind of setup to this? And so there's probably a few reasons for that. I think one of the things that I always think is that although the modern data stack is different and there's a lot of things that are new about this approach, in some respects, there's not much changed really. And there's still a complex set of things you want to do. There's still a lot of functions. There's still a lot of things you want to do beyond just kind of like extracting data and transforming it and so on. There's data lineage. There's things like, there's data activation. There's a whole bunch of these things that probably they had their analogies back in these monolithic BI suites from years ago, really, except now they actually do all get together. They don't cost you like $1 million to use. And they're kind of user-friendly and swappable and this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of these products out there. And a lot of it really also comes from the profusion now of people that are starting their own data companies. So as someone who runs a consultancy, it's a lot harder to run a consulting business, a service business, than it is to actually run a product business. And so if you've got a good idea for an area of kind of data stack that you can productize, it's actually a lot easier to actually start a company and get funding for that than it is to run a consultancy. So a lot of this is kind of opportunity really as well. But also, I think there is, to a certain extent, there's probably maybe too many, but certainly there's a lot in there now really within this kind of like ecosystem. Okay, so what's something, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but certainly something I've picked up on is the inevitable, I suppose, backlash now to the modern data stack. Okay, so if you follow, data Twitter, you follow kind of LinkedIn and so on, there's probably more conversation now about the death of the modern data stack than there is about saying how good it is. And some of it is justified. So some of it is things like talking about, I suppose it's very hard. One of the criticisms of the modern data stack is that you're replacing, I suppose, product integrations with human capital. You're replacing it with people who have to do things and so on. But certainly that's probably a valid argument, maybe to some extent. But there's also the cost element of it, and there is also the complexity of it as well. But certainly there's I'm starting to see the inevitable, I suppose, backlash to the modern data stack in some respects. Some of it is people trying to sell a product, but there is some valid criticisms there, I think, sometimes. But there is this kind of like, I suppose, at the moment, a bit of a kind of pushback on some of it. So kind of moving on a bit. Something I do think, though, is the case is that, first of all, this great kind of enthusiasm for the modern data stack, followed by the sort of inevitable backlash a little bit, is to a certain extent what you get with any kind of technology or any kind of new technology, where you get this kind of great interest and kind of hype and so on around it. And I'd say that that 20, that kind of, I suppose, that innovation trigger and the kind of peak of inflation, whatever, is around about 2020. So certainly around 2020, certainly when Snowflake themselves raised their IPO, and when DBT Labs raised their money, I think you look back then, that was the peak of kind of, I suppose, inflated expectations. But I think what we're seeing now really is what you expect with any kind of technology, where you start to kind of find that people are getting realistic at what you can do and understanding how it works, and what Gartner would call the slope of enlightenment, really. And I would argue that we're actually now going through this bit here into here, okay? So, certainly the modern data stack, it doesn't really kind of get away from the fact there are lots of things you need to integrate. It doesn't get away from the fact that data is hard, but it also does offer some sort of benefits and so on. So, moving on. One thing that I suppose I've noticed, and I suppose got self-interest in this, is that as people's, I suppose, expectations around the modern data stack, I suppose, get more realistic, and as there gets to be more, I suppose, experience in the market and so on, you then find that the kind of rise of the, I suppose, the partner ecosystem happens. Okay, I remember going to a Looker event back a few years ago, and I was trying to explain to somebody what a partner would do. It's like a sort of person from a startup, and I was saying, yeah, we're a partner, we're a consultancy, and they just couldn't actually understand what on earth we would be needed for, because Looker is a kind of self-service product. Why would you need a consultancy? Okay, and it's kind of a valid question, and I think as people start to do more with the modern data stack, and they kind of realize that actually a bit of experience could be useful here, you're starting to find that the partner ecosystem is building up now, and people are actually starting to come now to partners to help with implementations, okay? Which is good, because obviously that's what my business is. So, I think that I see it as a sign of maturity in the market. There you go. I think, to be quite candid, partners are experts because they've made all the mistakes. I think it's a kind of very valid kind of question, very valid point there. Certainly, for my own company, we've built many modern data stack systems now. We know where it can go wrong. We've kind of done it more than once. And so, I think especially with the kind of the funding market now, and generally people are trying to be more careful with what money they spend. I think, the idea of maybe hiring a data team to learn on the job and then they disappear after maybe sort of 6 months, I think that isn't something you can indulge as much now. I think, there is value in getting something done properly at the start, and actually having some continuity at the end as well. So, certainly I think that I'm finding there is more kind of like, acceptance of the value of partners. And I think it's a sign of maturity of the market, really. Okay. Anyway, that's my angle there. Hang on, that's not the end of it though. What do partners do though? Okay. Or what do people generally do with the modern data stack? Okay. So I was thinking to myself, so far we've been thinking about things like data transformation. We've been thinking about all these kind of like clever tools like reverse ETL and so on. But really, the thing that I'm paid for, and the thing that our company is paid for, and the thing we do most of is working with the database. Okay. What really the essence of the modern data stack is, it's really based around the cloud data warehouse. And it's the kind of, it's been astounding to me how much data warehousing and relational databases and general skills around data modeling and so on, and performance optimization and so on, are still so central and so key to getting the modern data stack to work properly. So as a consultancy, we spend most of our time doing things like data modeling, doing things like performance management, performance optimization, doing things like ETL and so on, okay? And it's the database, it's the data warehouse that is the kind of key to all of it, really, okay? Which I guess is why we're here today for this session. and this was a surprise to me because I remember presenting at events in the States 10 years ago, talking about how the data warehouse was dead and it was all now going to be Hadoop and all that kind of stuff. But it's surprising actually how much this is actually kind of still valid. And having a fast database that can run queries quickly, can handle concurrency and all this kind of stuff is really the most important thing to get right in any modern data stack project. All the rest of it is really icing on the cake, really, in my view. So, moving on a bit here. So this is my kind of joke that would generally go flat with this kind of thing. But yeah, the beer and data warehouses are the cause and the solution of all life's problems. And, and it's kind of, I found this last night about 11 o'clock, whatever. But the point of this really is getting the database right and performance and concurrency and all that kind of stuff is still the most important thing to get right on a modern data stack project, which really is what leads into the sessions we're covering today, really. So, we've worked with Firebolt, for example, on some projects, and, it's been interesting how the market for the cloud data warehouses has kind of specialized and fragmented over the last few years. So, up until recently, you couldn't really go wrong buying Snowflake, for example. It works, it scales and all that sort of thing. But as people's demands get more, as people want things to be, not only scalable, but really fast response times and so on, then things like Snowflake don't work. I mean, BigQuery was always my favorite database in the past, but it only will scale to a certain amount before it gets really expensive or hard to manage and that sort of thing. And getting the database to work properly and actually perform properly is the key to all of it, really. So I think although we talk about kind of new partners and new kind of data tools and all that sort of thing, this is the most important thing, really. So I'll be interested to talk to the guests tonight about how they've kind of made their systems work properly using Firebolt and so on. So that's my little kind of intro, really, to everything. So yeah, should we move on then?